The first thing I register is the smell. Antiseptic. Sharp and clean, yet somehow cloying. It scrapes the inside of my nostrils. It's a smell that screams hospital. A smell I've become far too familiar with. My eyelids flutter, heavy, like they're stitched together. I try to swallow, but my throat is raw, a desert. A low, persistent beep echoes from somewhere to my right, a monotonous rhythm section to the throbbing bass drum in my head. I'm awake. That's something. The fog in my brain begins to recede, just a little, and a single, urgent thought pushes through. Marcus. I turn my head, a slow, painful movement. The pillowcase beneath my cheek is cool, starched. My eyes focus, or try to. The room is dim, bathed in the gray, pre-dawn light, filtering through a slatted blind. There's a chair beside the bed. Empty. My heart gives a small, painful lurch. He should be here. He promised. In sickness and in health, he'd whispered, his voice thick with emotion, the day Dr. Chen told us they'd found a donor. A perfect match. My second chance. His hand had been warm in mine, a lifeline. Now there's just the empty chair and the incessant beeping of the monitor. The antiseptic smell seems stronger now, more invasive. I feel a tremor of unease, a cold snake slithering through the post-surgery haze. He wouldn't just leave, not now, not after everything. I remember the final moments before they wheeled me into the OR. Marcus's face, pale but smiling. I'll be right here when you wake up, Liam. First thing you'll see. His kiss, feather light on my forehead. The memory is so vivid it feels like a phantom touch, but the chair is undeniably, cruelly empty. A nurse bustles in, her rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly on the linoleum floor. She's round-faced, with kind eyes that crinkle at the corners when she smiles. Mr. Henderson, or should I say Mr. Henderson-to-be, she says, her voice a gentle murmur. She checks the IV drip, her movements efficient, practiced. The cool liquid seeping into my vein is a strange comfort. Marcus? My voice is a croak, barely audible. It hurts to speak. Her smile falters, just for a second, but I see it. Oh, he had to step out for a bit, said he'd be back soon. She adjusts my blanket, her touch impersonal but not unkind. The fabric feels rough against my skin. Stepped out? The words are a struggle. My new kidney, a gift from a stranger, is working, filtering, but the rest of me feels broken, fragile. Where? The beeping of the heart monitor seems to mock my growing anxiety. He was very worried, of course, she continues, avoiding my gaze now. She fusses with a chart at the end of my bed. The rustle of paper is loud in the quiet room. He mentioned needing to check on a friend. Emma, I think. Said she was having a bit of a rough time, poor thing. Emma. The name hangs in the sterile air. Emma, his sick friend. The one he'd been spending so much time with these last few months. She's very fragile, he'd explained, his eyes pleading for understanding. Newly divorced, no family nearby. She needs me, Liam, just until she's back on her feet. I'd tried to be supportive, to swallow the bitter taste of jealousy, even as my own body was failing me. The constant nausea, the exhaustion that clung to me like a shroud, the metallic tang of medication always on my tongue. He was supposed to be my rock. Is she here? I ask, a knot tightening in my chest. The antiseptic smell feels suffocating. The nurse finally meets my eyes, and there's something there. A flicker of pity, maybe? Oh no, dear. Not here on this floor, anyway. Mr. Peterson, that's your fiancé, right? Such a handsome man. He was very specific. Said he needed to be with the blonde woman. In maternity. Maternity. The word drops into the sterile silence of the recovery room like a stone into a deep, dark well. It echoes, reverberates, shatters the fragile peace I'd clung to. The beeping of the monitor speeds up, a frantic, panicked rhythm. The antiseptic smell suddenly makes me want to gag. Maternity. He missed my transplant, my life-saving surgery, the moment I needed him most, to be with a blonde woman in maternity. The empty chair isn't just empty. It's a monument to a betrayal so profound it steals the air from my lungs. The tremor inside me becomes a violent shake. My new kidney, the precious gift, feels like it's being ripped from my body. The pain isn't physical. It's something far, far worse. It's the sound of my world collapsing. The months leading up to the transplant are a blur of hospital visits, endless tests, and the gnawing fear that time was running out. My kidneys, once trusty filters, were staging a slow, agonizing rebellion. Each day was a battle against fatigue that settled deep in my bones, a nausea that made even water a trial, and the ever-present metallic taste of the cocktail of medications I had to swallow. The vibrant colors of my life had faded, leached out by illness, leaving behind a monochrome existence. Through it all, Marcus was supposed to be my anchor, the steady hand in the storm. And for a while, he was, or so I let myself believe. His absences started subtly. A missed dinner here, a late night at work there. Then came Emma. "She's an old friend from college," he'd said, his gaze just a little too earnest. "Going through a really tough time. Her divorce, it's messy. She just needs a shoulder to cry on, someone to talk to." The air in our apartment, usually filled with easy laughter and the scent of our shared meals, his spicy curries, my attempts at baking, grew heavy with unspoken questions. I remember one Tuesday I'd just come home from a grueling dialysis session. The clinic always smelled faintly of bleach and despair, and I carried that scent home on my skin. I was drained, the life force seemingly sucked out of me along with the toxins. All I wanted was to collapse on the sofa with Marcus, feel his arms around me, hear his voice telling me everything would be okay. But the apartment was empty. A note on the fridge, scribbled in his familiar, impatient hand. "Emma had a crisis. Back late. Love, Em." No, I love you. Just love. The casual abbreviation felt like a tiny, sharp shard of glass under my skin. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, acrid and bitter. His excuses became more frequent, flimsier. Emma's car broke down. Emma's pipes burst. Emma's cat is sick. Emma, Emma, Emma. Her name became a discordant note in the symphony of our life, a constant, irritating hum beneath the surface of our conversations. He'd come home smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, something light and floral, a stark contrast to the warm vanilla scent I favored. My suspicions began to crystallize, hardening from a vague unease into a cold, sharp certainty. But I was so tired, Liam, so profoundly, soul-deep tired. Battling kidney failure was a full-time job, and I had little energy left for confrontations, for the emotional excavation that digging for the truth would require. It was easier, in a way, to cling to the fiction he was weaving. One rainy Saturday, I was propped up in bed, a heating pad pressed against my aching back, trying to distract myself with a book. The words swam before my eyes. Concentration was another casualty of my illness. Marcus was, predictably, with Emma. "Helping her sort through some old boxes from her marriage," he'd said, kissing my forehead with a briskness that felt more like a peck from a distant relative than a lover. The rain lashed against the window pane, a soundtrack to my bleak thoughts. The steady drip, drip, drip from a faulty gutter outside mirrored the slow erosion of my trust. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number. You should know what your fiancé is really up to. Below it, a picture. Marcus. And Emma. They weren't sorting boxes. They were in a park, huddled together on a bench, his arm around her shoulders. She was laughing, her head tilted back, her blonde hair catching the weak sunlight that had broken through the clouds. And she wasn't just sick. Her hand rested protectively on a distinctly rounded stomach. Pregnant. Emma was pregnant. The air rushed out of my lungs. The phone slipped from my numb fingers, clattering onto the wooden floor. The metallic taste in my mouth was suddenly overwhelming, as if I'd been chewing on old pennies. My world tilted, the room spinning. Pregnant. He'd been lying. Not just about the nature of his relationship with Emma, but about everything. Every late night, every canceled plan, every whispered phone call he took in the other room. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. The floral scent of her perfume, his increasingly distant affection, the casual love-em. A cold rage, something I hadn't felt in months, began to burn through the fog of my illness. It was a clarifying fire. With trembling hands, I picked up the phone. I saved the picture. I saved the unknown number. This wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was a fact, a brutal, undeniable fact. And in that moment, a quiet power began to stir within me. I wouldn't just crumble. I wouldn't just fade away. I started a new note on my phone, a hidden file. Title, Marcus's Lies. I began to document everything. Dates, times, excuses, discrepancies. Each entry was a small act of defiance, a way of reclaiming some control in a life that felt increasingly out of my hands. The rhythmic click of the keyboard as I typed was a counterpoint to the frantic thumping of my own heart. If he was going to build a world of deceit, I was going to map it, meticulously. The days that followed were a strange dance. I played the part of the trusting fiancé, the sick partner needing his care. He played the part of the devoted caregiver, torn by his obligations to a fragile friend. We moved through our apartment like actors in a badly written play, the script full of stilted lines and false emotions. The scent of his betrayal, that light floral perfume, seemed to cling to him, a constant, invisible miasma. The transplant call came on a Wednesday morning. The sun was shining, a rare burst of cheer in a gray week. Dr. Chen's voice on the phone was like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. "Liam, we have a kidney." Joy, pure and untainted, surged through me, momentarily eclipsing everything else. Marcus was there. He held me, his embrace tight, his own eyes shining with what I desperately wanted to believe were tears of relief. "We're going to get through this, Liam," he'd said, his voice thick. "You're going to be okay." At the hospital, the pre-op procedures were a whirlwind. Forms to sign, questions to answer, vials of blood taken. The metallic tang of fear mixed with the hope that was blooming in my chest. Marcus was by my side, holding my hand, his touch seemingly steady. But even then his phone buzzed incessantly. "Just work," he'd murmur, stepping away to take the calls in hushed tones, or, "Emma, just checking in. She's so anxious for me. For us." I was too focused on the monumental event unfolding in my own life to press him. The surgery, the recovery, the promise of a future free from the shackles of dialysis, it consumed my thoughts. But a seed of doubt planted by that anonymous text message had taken root. Later that afternoon, as I was waiting to be taken to the OR, a kind-faced admissions clerk was going over some final paperwork. Her pen, a cheap blue Bic, hovered over a form. "And Mr. Peterson is listed here as father on Miss Emma Cartwright's pre-admission forms for the maternity ward. Just need to confirm his relationship for our records, as he's also your next of kin." Her words, spoken so casually, hit me with the force of a physical blow. Father. Not just a friend, not just a shoulder to cry on. Father. The antiseptic smell of the hospital corridor, the distant chatter of nurses, the squeak of a gurney's wheels, it all faded into a deafening roar in my ears. He hadn't just been supporting a pregnant friend. He was the father of her child, the child he was with in maternity, while I lay here, waiting for a new kidney. The betrayal was a monstrous, many-headed beast, and it was far more horrific than I could have ever imagined. The quiet power I'd felt, the meticulous documentation of his lies, it all felt like a child's sandcastle against a tidal wave. But even as the wave threatened to pull me under, a tiny, defiant spark remained. He wouldn't break me. He wouldn't. The rain started just as I was drifting in and out of a restless, pain-laced sleep. It wasn't a gentle shower, but a furious downpour, drumming against the large window of my hospital room, each drop like a tiny, angry fist. The sound filled the silence, a counterpoint to the rhythmic beep of the monitor and the dull ache in my side where my new kidney was settling in. I'd been in recovery for what felt like an eternity, though the digital clock on the wall told me it had only been about 18 hours since the nurse's devastating slip about maternity. 18 hours of replaying her words, of the monstrous truth of Marcus's betrayal twisting like a knife in my gut. My own phone, retrieved from my belongings by a sympathetic nurse, lay on the bedside table. It had remained stubbornly silent. No calls from Marcus, no texts, just the gaping void of his absence. The antiseptic smell of the room, mingled with the scent of floor cleaner from the morning rounds, was starting to make me feel queasy again, a bitter reminder of where I was and why. Then, it vibrated. Marcus's name flashed on the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a wild, irrational moment, I thought maybe there was an explanation, a terrible misunderstanding. Hope, that stubborn weed, tried to push through the cracks in my shattered trust. I swiped to answer, my hand trembling so much I almost dropped the phone. The cool plastic felt slippery in my grip. Liam? Oh, thank God. His voice was a rush of relief, laced with an exhaustion that for a fleeting second I almost pitied. Liam, baby, how are you feeling? They just let me know you were properly awake. I've been so worried. The audacity of it. The sheer, unadulterated gall. A cold fury, sharp and clean, cut through my pain. Worried? I managed, my voice raspy, the effort sending a jolt through my incision. The rain hammered against the glass, a furious percussion. Of course I've been worried, frantic. I couldn't be there right when you woke up. Emma, she had a bit of an emergency. The doctors were concerned. I had to make sure she was okay. You understand, right? She's so alone? He sounded so reasonable, so caring. The devoted friend, the liar. Emma, I repeated, the name tasting like ash in my mouth. The blonde woman in maternity, Marcus? Is that the Emma you're talking about? Silence. A thick, heavy silence, broken only by the drumming rain and the frantic beeping of my heart monitor, which had definitely picked up on my agitation. I could almost hear him scrambling, his brain working furiously to concoct another lie. The scent of lilies, which he knew I hated but always seemed to forget, wafted from a wilting bouquet someone, probably not him, had sent. Liam, it's complicated, he finally stammered. I was going to tell you, after your surgery, when you were stronger. Stronger? My laugh was a harsh, broken sound. You think this makes me stronger, Marcus? Finding out my fiancé, the man who was supposed to be here holding my hand, was actually holding hers while she was in labor? With your child? The words hung in the air, raw and undeniable. The rain seemed to intensify, matching the storm brewing inside me. It just happened, Liam, he pleaded, his voice cracking. It wasn't planned. We were both going through a lot. It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. A mistake? I could feel the stitches in my side pull with every ragged breath. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk, Marcus. A mistake is taking a wrong turn, fathering a child with another woman while your fiancé is dying of kidney failure. That's not a mistake. That's a choice, a series of choices. The antiseptic smell of the room, once a neutral backdrop, now felt like the scent of his deceit, clinging to everything. I love you, Liam. You have to believe that. His voice was desperate now. This doesn't change how I feel about you. Doesn't it? I whispered, the fight momentarily draining out of me, leaving a vast, aching emptiness. It changes everything for me. The soft hum of the hospital machinery, the quiet squeak of a nurse's shoes in the hallway, all seemed to amplify the desolation I felt. Emma. Her pregnancy, I forced myself to ask, needing to know the full extent of the devastation. When did you find out? A pause. The rain had softened slightly, a mournful drizzle now. A few months ago, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. A few months? So, all those times he'd been with her, supporting her, he'd known. He'd known, and he'd continued to lie day after day. The image of them in the park, her hand on her pregnant belly, flashed in my mind. He'd known then. He'd looked me in the eye, told me he loved me, all while harboring this monumental secret. It's further along than you said, isn't it? I pressed, a cold dread settling over me. She wasn't just having an emergency. She was giving birth, wasn't she, Marcus? Another silence, longer this time. The kind of silence that screams guilt. The drumming of my own heart was a dull, painful throb. Yes, he finally conceded, the word small, defeated. A baby boy, born last night. Last night. While I was unconscious, fighting for my life, my future hanging in the balance, he was welcoming his son into the world. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Please, Liam, he begged, just give me some time. Time to figure things out, to make this right. We can get through this. I know we can. Time. He wanted time. As if this were some minor logistical hurdle, something that could be figured out with a bit of careful planning. The cool, smooth surface of my phone felt alien against my ear. The sound of his voice, once a comfort, now grated on my nerves. There's nothing to figure out, Marcus, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. You made your choice. You chose her. You chose him. A strange sense of calm was descending. The calm of a battlefield after the bombs have fallen. The devastation was total, but the shelling had stopped. Before he could reply, before he could offer another platitude, another empty promise, I ended the call. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle sigh of the rain and the steady, rhythmic beep of the monitor, a testament to the new life beating within me, a life he had so carelessly disregarded. Later that evening, after the dinner tray had been cleared, untouched, and the painkillers had taken the edge off the physical ache, a hospital administrator came by with some routine discharge planning paperwork. Among them was a financial statement, an overview of expected costs and insurance coverage. My eyes scanned the figures, my mind still numb. Then, a line item caught my attention. A series of significant withdrawals from our joint savings account over the past few months. Withdrawals I hadn't made. Withdrawals I hadn't authorized. The dates corresponded with Emma's apparent crises. Prenatal care. Baby supplies. A new apartment for her, perhaps? He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally, he'd plundered our shared future to fund his secret life. The rain had stopped. The quiet hum of the hospital at night was the only sound. But in the sterile silence of that room, something new was beginning to solidify within me, a cold, hard resolve. He wouldn't just get away with this. I wouldn't let him. The fight was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of healing and quiet fury. Physical recovery was a slow, uphill climb. Each movement was a reminder of the gaping hole in my side, a dull, persistent ache that mirrored the one in my heart. Nurses came and went, their faces a rotating cast of sympathetic smiles and professional efficiency. They changed dressings, monitored my vitals, and offered bland encouragement. The antiseptic scent of the hospital had become the perfume of my strange new reality. Dr. Chen was a constant, a reassuring presence. Her calm demeanor and no-nonsense approach were a balm to my frayed nerves. "The kidney is performing beautifully, Liam," she'd said during her morning rounds, her fingers gently probing my abdomen. "You're a fighter." I didn't feel like a fighter. I felt like a casualty, surveying the wreckage of a life I no longer recognized. The metallic tang of post-op medication was a constant companion on my tongue, a taste I associated with both survival and betrayal. Marcus didn't call again. He didn't visit. The silence from his end was a deafening roar, more damning than any excuse he could have concocted. It was clear he was hoping I'd just absorb this, process it, maybe even forgive him in his absence. He'd always underestimated my strength. One afternoon, bored and restless, I asked for a copy of my complete medical file, just to read, to understand the journey my body had undertaken. The nurse, a young man named Ben, with kind eyes and an air of quiet competence, brought it to me a few hours later, a thick manila folder bound with a rubber band. The crisp sound of paper rustling as I opened it was sharp in the otherwise quiet room. The scent of photocopier toner, dry and slightly chemical, clung to the pages. I flipped through the surgical reports, the lab results, the endless pages of doctors' notes, most of it technical jargon I barely understood. Then, I came to the admissions paperwork, the forms I'd signed in a pre-surgery days, my signature, shaky but legible, and there, under emergency contact, Marcus Peterson, relationship, fiancé. That was expected. But then, tucked further back, was a newer form, dated just a few weeks before the transplant. A patient information update. My name was at the top, but the signature at the bottom wasn't mine. It was a crude approximation, a forgery, and the information had been altered. Emergency contact, Emma Cartwright. Relationship to patient, close friend. My address was still listed as our shared apartment, but Marcus's contact details had been subtly changed, a different phone number I didn't recognize, a new email address. A cold wave washed over me. He had systematically begun to erase me, to replace me even before the transplant. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, a panicked reaction to Emma's labor. This was calculated. This was planned. The rustling of the papers in my hand sounded like dry leaves skittering across a grave. My eyes scanned further. Hospital policy dictated that next of kin or designated emergency contacts were to be kept informed of a patient's status, especially during critical procedures. Tucked into a pocket of the folder were internal hospital communication logs. Little notes, scribbled updates. One caught my eye, a timestamp from the day of my surgery, right around the time I would have been in the OR. Spoke to Mr. Peterson, RE patient status. He informed staff he is separated from patient, currently staying with Miss Cartwright, maternity ward, room 312, who is his current partner. Requested all updates regarding Mr. Henderson be relayed through him, but to list Miss Cartwright as primary contact if he is unavailable. Separated. He'd told the hospital staff we were separated. While I was undergoing a life-or-death surgery, he was actively rewriting our history, repositioning himself as Emma's devoted partner, relegating me to the status of… what? An inconvenient footnote? The crisp, official-looking paper trembled in my hand. The sterile, impersonal font seemed to mock the turmoil raging inside me. The sheer audacity, the depth of the deceit, was staggering. This wasn't just about infidelity, about a secret child. This was about a deliberate, cold-blooded campaign to marginalize me, to control the narrative, even with the people who were literally holding my life in their hands. The metallic taste in my mouth was so strong, I felt like I might be sick. He hadn't just betrayed our relationship, he'd tampered with my safety net, my medical lifeline. What if something had gone wrong during the surgery? Would they have even been able to reach anyone who genuinely cared about me? A quiet, determined anger began to replace the shock. This wasn't just personal. This was violation. He'd used my vulnerability, my illness, as a cover for his machinations. The hospital social worker, a kind woman named Mrs. Davies, whom I'd met briefly before the surgery, had left her card on my bedside table. Her smile had been genuine, her offer of support sincere. "Anything you need, Liam. Navigating the system, emotional support, practical matters." I picked up my phone. My fingers, surprisingly steady now, dialed her number. The quiet power move I'd initiated by documenting his lies now felt insufficient. This required more. This required professional intervention. "Mrs. Davies?" I said, my voice low but firm. "It's Liam Henderson. I think I need to schedule a consultation. It's about some irregularities with my medical records. And I might need some legal advice." The faint scent of antiseptic wipes from when the nurse had last cleaned the table seemed to sharpen, focusing my resolve. As I was ending the call, my phone buzzed with an incoming text. An unknown number, but the area code was familiar. It was Marcus's mother's area code. My heart sank. Had he sent her to plead his case? I braced myself. The message was short, chilling. "Liam, I'm so sorry. I've known about Emma for months. Marcus swore he'd tell you. I should have said something. Please forgive an old woman's weakness." Months. His own mother knew and said nothing. The conspiracy of silence was wider, deeper than I had imagined. The betrayal wasn't just Marcus's. It was a family affair. The crisp hospital sheets suddenly felt like a shroud. The carefully constructed world I thought I inhabited had been a lie, propped up by secrets and deceit. And I, the unsuspecting fool, had been dancing in the dark. The fight wasn't just with Marcus anymore. It was with everyone who had enabled him. The days following the discovery in my medical records were a crucible. The initial shock gave way to a cold, simmering anger, then a profound weariness. It was exhausting, holding on to so much betrayal. The antiseptic smell of my room, the constant beeping of monitors, the bland hospital food, it all felt like a prison, albeit one designed for healing. I needed out, not just of the hospital, but of the life Marcus had so thoroughly poisoned. Dr. Sarah Chen became an unexpected pillar of strength. Beyond her medical expertise, she possessed a quiet empathy that resonated deeply. During one of her morning visits, while she was checking my incision, her sharp eyes didn't miss the dark circles under mine, the tremor in my hands. The fluorescent lights of the room cast harsh shadows, making everything feel stark and unforgiving. "You're healing well physically, Liam," she said, her voice gentle but direct. "But the body and mind are connected. How are you really doing?" I hesitated. It was one thing to unburden myself to a social worker, another to admit the raw, messy truth of my situation to my surgeon. But something in her gaze, a compassionate understanding, made me open up. I told her everything: Marcus, Emma, the baby, the lies, the medical record tampering. The words tumbled out, a torrent of pain and disbelief. The whir of the air conditioning unit was the only sound as I spoke. She listened patiently, her expression unwavering. When I finished, the silence in the room felt heavy, thick with unspoken sorrow. "Liam," she finally said, her voice firm but kind. "What Marcus did is unconscionable. Medically, ethically, humanly. You deserved his support, his honesty. Not this." She paused, then added, "You're not alone in this. We'll make sure you have the support you need, both in here and when you leave." Her words were a small comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. The starched fabric of her white coat seemed to radiate a quiet authority. The true lifeline, however, came in the form of my best friend, Riley. He'd been overseas on a work trip when I'd had the transplant, and I'd only given him the barest of details, not wanting to worry him. But when he landed back in the country and heard the clipped, strained tone of my voice on the phone, he knew something was deeply wrong. He was at the hospital within hours, his familiar, boisterous energy a welcome disruption to the sterile monotony. The scent of coffee and the faint, spicy aroma of the takeout food he'd smuggled in for me, against hospital rules, of course, briefly banished the ever-present antiseptic smell. "Okay, spill," he said, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair that Marcus should have occupied. "And don't you dare sugarcoat it. I know that fine voice of yours. It means the world is ending." And so, I told him, everything. From the empty chair when I woke up, to the nurse's slip about maternity, to the devastating phone call with Marcus, the doctored medical records, and the text from Marcus's mother. Riley listened, his usual jovial expression hardening into a mask of fury as the story unfolded. The plastic cup of coffee in his hand grew cold, forgotten. When I finally fell silent, voice hoarse, emotions spent, he just looked at me for a long moment. The distant sound of an ambulance siren, a common city noise, filtered in through the window. "That absolute bastard," he finally breathed, his voice tight with anger. "Liam, I am so sorry." Then his expression softened with a self-reproach that pained me. "I should have pushed harder," he said, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Months ago, I told you, remember? I said there was something off about him, about this whole Emma situation. He was too shifty, too defensive whenever I asked about her." I did remember. Vaguely. Riley had met Emma once, briefly, at a disastrous dinner party Marcus had insisted on hosting. I'd been too unwell to attend, confined to bed. Riley had called me afterwards, his voice laced with suspicion. "I don't trust her, Liam, and I don't trust him around her. There's a vibe, a weird, secretive vibe." At the time, I'd dismissed it as Riley being overprotective, perhaps a little jealous of anyone taking Marcus's attention away from our friendship, away from me. The metallic taste of regret filled my mouth now, bitter and sharp. He'd seen it. He'd tried to warn me. And I, blinded by love and the desperate hope that my fiancé was the man I believed him to be, hadn't listened. "You tried," I whispered, the admission costing me. I didn't want to see it. Riley reached across and took my hand. His was warm, solid, a stark contrast to the cold emptiness Marcus had left behind. The pressure of his grip was grounding. "Hey," he said softly, his eyes meeting mine. "None of this is on you. You were sick, Liam. You were fighting for your life. You trusted him. That's not a weakness. That's what people in love do." His words, simple and direct, cut through the layers of self-blame I'd started to wrap around myself. That conversation was a turning point. With Riley by my side, the path forward, while still daunting, felt less solitary. He became my champion, my advocate, my bullshit detector. He helped me liaise with Mrs. Davies, the social worker, who was already putting me in touch with a lawyer specializing in relationship dissolution and, potentially, fraud. The quiet power move of simply asking for help, of allowing myself to lean on someone, felt monumental. We started making plans, small things at first. Riley would find a short-term rental for me for when I was discharged. He'd help me pack my essentials from the apartment I'd shared with Marcus, the apartment that now felt tainted, a crime scene. We talked about changing my phone number, about forwarding Marcus's mail, about disentangling our finances. Each small step was an act of reclamation. The cool, smooth surface of the legal forms Mrs. Davies brought felt like weapons in my hand, tools to carve out a new future. The thought of facing Marcus again filled me with a mixture of dread and a strange, burgeoning resolve. I knew it was inevitable. He wouldn't just disappear, not when there were assets to divide, a narrative to control. The day before my scheduled discharge, I was sitting up in bed, a book Riley had brought lying open but unread in my lap. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room. The usual hospital hum was a backdrop to my thoughts. I was actually feeling a little stronger, the constant ache in my side beginning to subside. The scent of the antiseptic wipes the nurse had used to clean my bedside table was sharp, almost invigorating. I was planning my escape, my independence. Then, the door to my room opened without a knock. Marcus. He stood there, holding a ridiculously large bouquet of lilies. Lilies again. His hair uncharacteristically disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. He looked tired, stressed, and, for a fleeting moment, almost pathetic. But the manipulative charm was still there, switched on like a faulty appliance. "Liam," he said, his voice oozing a practiced sincerity. "Can we please just talk? We need to work things out." My heart gave a painful thud. The moment I'd been dreading and somehow preparing for had arrived. The cliffhanger of our last conversation was about to resolve itself, and I knew, with a chilling certainty, that this confrontation would be a battle for my own soul. He stepped into the room, the lilies held out like a peace offering, their cloyingly sweet scent immediately overwhelming the sterile hospital air. It was a scent I'd come to associate with his particular brand of oblivious selfishness. He knew I hated lilies. Had I ever told him? I must have, years ago, when we first moved in together, and he'd brought home a bouquet after our first argument. A small detail, perhaps, but it felt symbolic of the vast chasm of things he never truly saw, never truly knew about me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a harsh glare on his strained face. "Liam, please," he began, his voice a low, placating murmur. He approached the bed, his eyes searching mine for... what? Forgiveness? Weakness? "I know I messed up, royally, but we can't throw everything away, not like this." I just looked at him. The man I'd loved. The man I'd planned to spend my life with. The man who had shattered my world with such casual cruelty. The pain was still there, a raw, gaping wound, but beneath it, something new was hardening. Resolve. The quiet power I'd been cultivating, nurtured by Dr. Chen's support and Riley's fierce loyalty, felt like a shield. The rustle of his expensive jacket as he moved closer was an irritating sound. "There's nothing to work out, Marcus," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. The beeping of the monitor beside me remained even, a testament to the calm I was projecting, even if my insides were a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. He flinched, just slightly, at the coldness in my tone. "Don't say that, Liam. Please. What we have. What we had. It's too important." He set the lilies down on the already cluttered bedside table, their funereal scent now mingling with the antiseptic aroma. "Emma." The baby. It was a mistake. A stupid, terrible mistake. But it doesn't have to define us. A mistake that has a name, Marcus? A mistake that will call you Dad? I watched him, my gaze unwavering. You weren't just supporting a friend. You were building a second life, while I was here, literally fighting for mine. He had the grace to look away, his eyes falling to the neatly folded blanket at the foot of my bed. The silence stretched, taut, and uncomfortable. The distant clatter of a food cart in the hallway seemed amplified. I was scared, Liam, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Scared of losing you. Scared of the illness. Emma, she was just there. It wasn't supposed to happen. Gaslighting, the classic tactic. Minimize, deflect, play the victim. Riley's warnings echoed in my mind. He'll try to twist it, Liam. Make it your fault or nobody's fault. Don't let him. The cool, smooth feel of the hospital-grade cotton sheets under my hands was a small, tactile anchor in the storm of his words. Scared? I repeated, my voice dangerously soft. You think you were scared? I was the one facing death, Marcus. I was the one whose body was failing. And where were you? You were with her. You missed my transplant. You lied to the hospital. You told them we were separated. Each word was a carefully aimed dart, and I saw them hit their mark. His face paled. How did you know that? He stammered, his composure finally cracking. It doesn't matter how I know, I said, refusing to let him derail the conversation, refusing to let him make this about my discovery rather than his actions. What matters is that you did it. You systematically tried to erase me, to control the narrative, even when I was at my most vulnerable. The scent of lilies was making me nauseous. I pushed the bouquet further away with a trembling hand. I never wanted to hurt you, Liam, he insisted, his eyes welling up. Tears. Were they genuine? Or just another performance? It was impossible to tell anymore. The man I thought I knew was a phantom, a construct of my own hopes and his carefully crafted lies. But you did hurt me, Marcus, I said, the rawness of the admission catching in my throat. You didn't just hurt me. You decimated me. You took everything we built, everything I believed in, and you torched it. The rhythmic beep of the monitor was a steady, almost accusatory pulse in the room. He took a step closer, his hands outstretched as if to plead. Let me make it up to you. I'll end it with Emma. I'll do whatever it takes. We can go to therapy. We can rebuild. Please, Liam, don't do this. His desperation was palpable, but it didn't move me. Not anymore. It was the desperation of a man who had been caught, a man whose carefully constructed world was crumbling around him. It wasn't about me. Not really. It was about him, about what he stood to lose. The quiet power of that realization settled over me, a cloak of cold clarity. I wasn't just a victim in his drama anymore. I was a survivor, and I was done. No, Marcus, I said, my voice clear, unwavering. There's no rebuilding this. There's no us anymore. You made sure of that. I watched as the hope drained from his face, replaced by a dawning understanding. The fight was over. He had lost. He opened his mouth to speak, to argue, to plead again, but just then, the door to my room creaked open. A woman stood in the doorway, blonde, pale, and very, very pregnant. Emma. She looked from Marcus to me, then back to Marcus, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension. The lilies, with their funereal scent, suddenly seemed horribly appropriate. This wasn't just a confrontation anymore. It was about to become a full-blown revelation, and the collateral damage was going to be immense. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her hand instinctively going to her swollen belly. Her blue eyes, wide and bewildered, darted between me, propped up in the hospital bed, and Marcus, who looked like he'd seen a ghost. The squeak of her sensible flat shoes on the polished linoleum floor as she'd stepped in was the last normal sound before the world tilted on its axis for all three of us. The scent of lilies, already cloying, now seemed to mix with the faint, powdery smell of baby products that clung to Emma. "Marcus?" Her voice was a shaky whisper. "What's going on? Who is this?" She gestured vaguely towards me, her confusion palpable. Marcus's face, already pale, went ashen. He looked trapped, a cornered animal. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, no words coming out. The smooth, practiced liar was, for once, rendered speechless. "This," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, cutting through the suffocating tension, "is Liam, his fiancé. The one who was supposed to be having a life-saving kidney transplant while Marcus was with you." Emma's eyes snapped back to me, then widened further as she took in the IV stand, the monitors, the general ambiance of a post-operative recovery room. The antiseptic smell, the beeping machines, details she probably hadn't registered in her initial shock. "Transplant?" she echoed, her hand pressing harder against her stomach. "But he said you were just a friend, an old roommate. He said you were unwell, but not—" Her voice trailed off as the implications began to dawn on her. "Not critically ill? Not dependent on his presence, his support?" I finished for her, my gaze locking with hers. In her eyes, I saw not an enemy, but another victim of his elaborate deceit. A wave of something akin to pity, sharp and unwelcome, washed over me. The cool metal of the bed rail under my hand felt like the only solid thing in the room. "He told me the transplant was elective, something minor that got rescheduled," Emma whispered, her face crumbling. "He said he needed to be with me because I was having contractions, that the baby might come early. He said you understood, that you were fine with it." She looked at Marcus, her expression shifting from confusion to a horrified disbelief. "You lied to me." "Emma, please," Marcus finally choked out, his voice hoarse. "Let me explain." "Explain what, Marcus?" she shot back, her voice rising, laced with a dawning fury. "Explain how you were planning a wedding with him while telling me you loved me. Explain how you were at the hospital with me, holding my hand, while he was in surgery. Needing you?" Her breath hitched, a sob catching in her throat. The rhythmic squeak of a nurse's shoes passing in the hallway outside felt miles away, part of a different, saner world. "He told me he was separated from you, Liam," Marcus blurted out, turning to me, a desperate edge to his voice. "He made it sound like you were just going through the motions of helping an old friend." "Wait, what?" My head spun. "He told you?" I stared at Marcus, completely bewildered. Then I looked at Emma. The pieces clicked into a new, even more grotesque pattern. Marcus hadn't just lied to me. He'd lied to Emma about me. And apparently, he'd lied to me about what he'd told Emma. The sheer complexity of his deceptions was breathtaking. He'd woven a web so tangled, he was now caught in it himself. "You told me Liam was just a friend you were helping out," Emma cried, pointing an accusing finger at Marcus. "You said he was clingy, a bit emotionally unstable after his minor procedure was delayed. You said your relationship was long over, but you felt obligated to support him as a friend." The air crackled. Marcus looked from Emma to me, his face a mask of desperation. He was a puppet master whose strings had suddenly snapped. The overpowering sweetness of the lilies felt like a mockery. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice dripping with ice, though inside I felt a strange, almost hysterical urge to laugh at the absurdity of it all. You told Emma I was just a needy friend. And you told me you were merely supporting Emma, your fragile, pregnant friend. And all along you were engaged to me, about to father her child, and telling the hospital we were separated so you could be with her during the birth. The beeping of my heart monitor had sped up again, a frantic soundtrack to this three-ring circus of deceit. Emma sank onto the edge of the visitor's chair, the one Marcus had so conspicuously left empty. She looked utterly devastated. He told me he was leaving you for me," she whispered, her eyes fixed on Marcus. "That he was just waiting for the right time to tell you, after your procedure. The right time. While I was recovering from major surgery, reliant on him, vulnerable. That was his right time." The coldness of it was chilling. And then Emma dropped the final bomb. She looked directly at Marcus, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of ultimate betrayal. "And the twins, Marcus? When were you planning on mentioning them? Or was that going to be another right-time conversation?" Twins. The word hung in the air, sucking all the remaining oxygen from the room. My gaze flew to Marcus. His face, if possible, went even whiter. He looked like he was about to collapse. Twins. He hadn't just fathered a child, he'd fathered two. And he'd known. He'd known all along, through every lie, every manipulation. The scent of antiseptic, lilies, and baby powder swirled together, a nauseating cocktail of his treachery. In that moment, looking at Emma's tear-streaked face, at Marcus's utter devastation, a strange thing happened. The raw anger in me began to subside, replaced by a profound, almost detached sense of clarity. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak, pathetic man, so desperate to have everything, so terrified of consequences that he'd destroyed everything instead. Emma pushed herself up from the chair, her movements heavy, weary. She walked over to the bedside table and picked up the despised bouquet of lilies. Without a word, she turned and dumped them, unceremoniously, into the trash can in the corner. The plastic crinkled loudly. It was a small act, but deeply satisfying to witness. Then, she looked at me, a flicker of something new in her eyes. Not pity, but a shared understanding. An unexpected, unspoken alliance forged in the crucible of his lies. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "For my part in this, I didn't know." "I know," I replied. And I did. The three of us stood there, in the wreckage of Marcus's making. The path ahead was uncertain, messy, painful. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. The truth, however ugly, was out. And now, the untangling could begin. The aftermath of the three-way hospital room confrontation was a strange cocktail of exhaustion and empowerment. Emma left soon after her revelation about the twins, casting one last, shattered look at Marcus before disappearing down the corridor, the squeak of her shoes a mournful echo. Marcus himself seemed to deflate, all the fight, all the manipulative energy draining out of him, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man I thought I knew. He mumbled something about needing air and stumbled out of the room, leaving me alone with the lingering scent of his betrayal and the faint, funereal perfume of the discarded lilies. My discharge from the hospital, a day later, felt less like a release and more like stepping onto a battlefield. Riley was there, a steadfast presence, his car smelling reassuringly of old coffee and dog biscuits, a welcome antidote to the hospital's sterile environment. He didn't ask many questions, just packed my meager bag, helped me with the wheelchair the hospital insisted on for checkout, and drove me not to the apartment I'd shared with Marcus, but to a small, furnished rental he'd found on short notice. The scratch of the key in the new lock was a satisfying sound, the first note in the symphony of my new, independent life. The legal untangling began almost immediately. Mrs. Davies, the hospital social worker, had been true to her word, connecting me with a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer named Miss Albright. Her office, filled with the scent of old books and lemon polish, became a sanctuary of sorts. The crisp crackle of legal documents as she spread them across her mahogany desk was the sound of my reclaiming control. We talked about the shared apartment, the joint savings account Marcus had plundered, the car that was in both our names. Each asset was a thread in the tangled web of our former life, and each thread needed to be meticulously, painfully severed. The pen in my hand felt heavy as I signed affidavits, consent forms, declarations. Each signature was a small act of liberation. Removing Marcus from my medical documents was a priority. With Dr. Chen's assistance, we rectified the emergency contact information, his name and Emma's expunged, replaced with Riley's. I signed new advance directives, ensuring that my healthcare decisions would remain firmly in my own hands, or those of people I trusted implicitly. The cool, smooth paper of the new forms felt clean, unblemished by his deceit. Dr. Chen, during a follow-up appointment where the air was thick with the familiar scent of rubbing alcohol, reassured me. "Your recovery is progressing well, Liam. Physically, you're strong. The new kidney is a part of you now. Let the rest of the healing begin, too." One afternoon, while sorting through a box of papers Riley had retrieved from the old apartment, I came across a small, velvet ring box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded satin, was the engagement ring Marcus had given me. It was a simple platinum band, elegant and understated, just like I'd always wanted. I remembered the night he'd proposed. We were on a weekend getaway, a small coastal town. We'd had dinner at a tiny restaurant overlooking the ocean, the air filled with the scent of salt and grilled fish. Afterwards, we'd walked along the beach, the sand cool beneath our bare feet, the waves whispering secrets to the shore. He'd gotten down on one knee, his voice thick with emotion as he'd slipped the ring onto my finger. "In sickness and in health, Liam," he'd vowed, his eyes shining in the moonlight. "Till death do us part." The memory, once so precious, now felt like a cruel mockery. The platinum band, once a symbol of love and commitment, now seemed to radiate a cold, heavy betrayal. I closed the box with a snap, the sound definitive in the quiet room. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. But I knew I would. It was another chain to Marcus, and I was systematically breaking every single one. The process of forwarding Marcus's mail was a surprisingly cathartic, quiet power move. Piling up his glossy magazines, his bank statements, his alumni newsletters, and addressing them to Emma's apartment, her address Riley had discreetly obtained, felt like physically ejecting him from my life. The scratch of the pen as I wrote her name felt decisive. I even changed the locks on our old apartment, the one he still technically co-owned but had effectively abandoned for his new family. The click of the new tumblers falling into place was a deeply satisfying sound. Marcus, true to form, didn't take his eviction from my life gracefully. A week after I'd moved into the rental, a sleek, menacing envelope arrived, hand-delivered by a courier. The crisp, expensive paper smelled faintly of his cologne sandalwood and arrogance. It was from his lawyer. He was threatening legal action over the apartment, claiming I had no right to change the locks, that he intended to reclaim his property. His audacity was breathtaking. He, who had a new home with his new family, was trying to bully me out of the wreckage he'd created. Miss Albright, however, was unfazed. "Let him rattle his sabers, Liam," she'd said, her voice calm and confident over the phone, the faint hum of her office in the background. "He's the one who abandoned the marital home. He's the one who committed fraud with your medical records and financial accounts. He's playing a weak hand very loudly. We'll handle it." Her reassurance was a balm. The fight was far from over, but I wasn't fighting alone. The emotional untangling was harder, a slower, more insidious process. Sleepless nights were filled with replays of his lies, his betrayals. The phantom scent of lilies would sometimes wake me in a cold sweat. But with each passing day, with each legal document signed, with each small act of independence, the hold he had on me lessened. The raw wound was beginning to scar over, ugly perhaps, but a testament to survival. The months that followed were a slow, steady climb out of the abyss. My physical recovery, as Dr. Chen had predicted, progressed better than I could have hoped. The new kidney settled in, becoming a quiet, efficient part of me. The daily cocktail of anti-rejection drugs still left that familiar metallic taste in my mouth, but it was a taste I was learning to associate with life, with a future. The dull ache in my side faded to a memory, replaced by the occasional twinge that served as a reminder of the gift I'd received and the battle I'd endured. The antiseptic smell of hospitals gradually receded from my daily life, replaced by the sense of my new, small apartment. Brewing coffee. The lemon polish Riley used when he came over to help, mostly by eating my food and offering unsolicited advice. The clean, fresh scent of new bed linen. Emotional healing was a different beast altogether. Therapy, a suggestion from Mrs. Davies that I'd initially resisted, became an invaluable tool. Dr. Ramirez, my therapist, had a calm, inviting office that smelled faintly of chamomile tea and old paper. In that safe space, I unburdened myself, exploring the tangled mess of grief, anger, and betrayal. There were sessions where I raged, sessions where I wept, sessions where I simply sat in silence, the weight of it all too heavy for words. The gentle hum of the white noise machine in her office was a constant, soothing presence. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to rebuild my sense of self, a self that wasn't defined by Marcus or his deceit. I joined a support group for transplant recipients, sharing stories with people who understood the fear, the gratitude, the strange, disorienting experience of carrying a piece of someone else within you was incredibly validating. The community room where we met always had a slightly stale coffee aroma, but it was a place of genuine connection. Their faces, marked by their own battles, their own scars, reflected a resilience that inspired me. Riley remained my rock, my unwavering cheerleader. He helped me navigate the complexities of single life, from assembling flat-pack furniture, a true test of any friendship, to enduring my early, disastrous attempts at cooking for one. His laughter, booming and infectious, was a frequent and welcome sound in my small apartment, chasing away the shadows. The warmth of his hand, clapping me on the shoulder after a particularly challenging therapy session, was a reminder that I wasn't alone. Surprisingly, an unexpected friendship began to blossom with Emma. After the hospital confrontation, she had reached out, tentatively at first. We met for coffee in a neutral cafe, the air filled with the comforting scent of roasted beans and pastries. She was, I discovered, as much a victim of Marcus's manipulations as I was. He had painted me as a pathetic, unstable ex he couldn't shake, while simultaneously promising her a future he had no intention of building honestly. She had left him, decisively, after learning the full extent of his lies. She was now navigating the daunting reality of raising twins alone. Our conversations were hesitant initially, laced with the awkwardness of our shared history. But gradually a bond formed, forged in the fires of Marcus's betrayal. We were two survivors, finding solace in an unlikely alliance. The soft clinking of our coffee cups was a small sound of solidarity. One crisp autumn afternoon, feeling stronger than I had in years, I went for my first proper walk in the park near my apartment. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The vibrant reds and golds of the trees were a feast for the eyes, a stark contrast to the monochrome world I'd inhabited during my illness. Each breath of fresh air felt like a gift, each step a victory. It was a quiet power move, this simple act of walking, of reclaiming my body, my health, my space in the world. During that walk, I found a flyer pinned to a community notice board. Volunteers needed, Kidney Disease Awareness Foundation. It felt like a sign. The next day I made the call, throwing myself into something meaningful, something that could help others navigate the terrifying journey I'd been on, felt like the right next step. It was a way to transform my pain into purpose. The cheerful voice of the volunteer coordinator on the other end of the line, the scent of the ink on the application form I filled out. It all felt like part of a new chapter. A few weeks later, an email landed in my inbox. An old colleague, now working for a company in a different city, had heard about my recovery and reached out. "Liam, great to hear you're doing well. A position has opened up here. Senior Project Manager. It's a big step, challenging, but I immediately thought of you. Interested?" Another city, a new job, a complete fresh start. The possibility hung in the air, exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. The quiet hum of my laptop as I reread the email was the sound of a door creaking open to an unknown future. Was I ready? 1 year? 12 months since the transplant. Since the world I knew had shattered and reformed into something new, something stronger. I stood in my new apartment, in a new city. The late afternoon sun streaming through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The scent of freshly brewed coffee, my own particular blend, filled the small kitchen. I was thriving. The job was challenging, fulfilling. I'd made new friends, tentative at first, but genuine. My new life, built from the ashes of the old, was good, it was mine. On the polished surface of my new dining table, a celebratory splurge, lay a stack of documents, the final release papers, divorce decree from Marcus, legally severing our ties, financial settlements painstakingly negotiated by Miss Albright, ensuring I recouped what he'd taken. And the last, most symbolic one, a form from the hospital, a final medical records update, officially, irrevocably, removing Marcus Peterson as any kind of contact, any kind of connection to my health or my life. The scratch of my pen as I signed my name, Liam Henderson, no hyphen, no shared identity, was firm, decisive. Each stroke was a final severing, a quiet power move that resonated deep in my soul. The crisp official paper felt cool and smooth beneath my hand. This was it, the end of a chapter, the true beginning of the next. Later that week, purely by chance, I ran into Marcus. I was grabbing a coffee at a downtown cafe, the air thick with the aroma of roasted beans and a hint of cinnamon from the morning's pastries. He was standing in line, looking diminished. His expensive suit seemed to hang off him, his once confident posture stooped. He looked older, tired, the spark of manipulative charm I'd once found so alluring now extinguished, leaving behind a residue of desperation. Our eyes met. A flicker of recognition, then panic in his. He started to say something, my name a hesitant question on his lips. I simply nodded, a polite, distant acknowledgement of a stranger, and turned back to order my coffee. There was nothing left to say. No anger, no bitterness, just a profound sense of indifference. He was a ghost from a past life, a life I no longer inhabited. The barista called my name, the sound of it, my own unadulterated name, clear and strong in the bustling cafe. I'd heard, through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances Riley still occasionally encountered, that Emma was doing well. The twins, a boy and a girl, were healthy, thriving. She was a single mother, resilient and strong, building a good life for herself and her children, far from Marcus's destructive orbit. Sometimes I thought about her, about our strange, unexpected bond forged in betrayal. We weren't close, the geographical distance and the sheer weirdness of our connection precluding that. But there was a thread of mutual respect, of shared survival. That evening, Riley and a few of my new friends from the city gathered at my apartment for a celebratory dinner. The air was filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the aroma of the slightly too ambitious paella I'd attempted to cook. The sound of their voices, warm and genuine, was a symphony of chosen family. This was my support system now. This was my tribe. The antiseptic smell of hospitals, the cloying scent of lilies, the metallic taste of fear. They were all distant memories, faded and powerless. As I raised my glass, a toast to new beginnings, to second chances, to the unexpected gifts that can emerge from even the deepest betrayals, I felt a profound sense of peace. My new kidney, a silent, steady companion, was working flawlessly. My heart, once shattered, was healed, stronger in the broken places. My name, finally, wonderfully, was my own. And in that moment, a surprising thought surfaced, clear and undeniable. I was grateful. Grateful for the betrayal. Because without it, I would never have discovered the strength I possessed, the resilience I harbored, the incredible capacity for renewal that lay dormant within me. Marcus hadn't destroyed me. He'd liberated me. The final, quiet power move was the realization that his devastating act of treachery had, in the end, been the catalyst for my truest, most authentic self to emerge. Looking out at the twinkling city lights from my window, the future stretched before me, bright and full of promise. And I was ready for it.